This is the kind of movie you swear was the funniest thing you had ever seen as a kid until you rewatch it. What's your favorite Steve Martin movie? Pink Panther 2 is a full 2 steps removed from its source material. The first Steve Martin Pink Panther was a remake in the vein of 90s slapstick comedies, and the original series is closer to the Naked Gun films. Pink Panther 2 sits firmly in the camp of straight-to-DVD sequels for kids that grip their pencil with their full fist, and the parents that begrudgingly raised those kids. I won't be too harsh, there's definitely funny bits and moments within the movie, but as a cohesive narrative, it falls absolutely flat. These films used to rely on the audience understanding parody. A scene setup would look just like something out of a James Bond movie, and then the jokes would reveal themselves. That is just not the case here. I'm Seth, and it's day 41 of the Ticket Stub Movie Club. Today's movie, Pink Panther 2. This one's directed by Harold Zwart and stars Steve Martin, Alfred Molina, Andy Garcia, John Cleese, Emily Mortimer. Honestly, this is kind of a stacked fucking cast for what this movie is. So let's dive into it. I remember very fondly watching the first Pink Panther. I think we had running jokes for months within my family. We just couldn't stop laughing at some of these bits. Steve Martin is someone that has always been in my life. I know y'all have peeped this Muppets tattoo. I'm a giant Muppets fan, and he has a cameo in the original Muppet movie where he plays a waiter that is one of the funniest performances of sarcasm I think I've ever seen in a movie, and the fact that it happens in a Muppet movie. He's also one of the few returning guests on the Muppet Show because he's a multi-talented guy. He's a comedian, he's an excellent banjo player, singer, songwriter. This is a guy that can absolutely lead a movie. I remember Cheaper by the Dozen was one of his that was always on in our house. Pink Panther 1, always on. So when Pink Panther 2 comes out, I'm excited as a kid. And honestly, I think the rest of this review is just going to read really cynical. So let me just upfront say that for a kid, this was a 10 out of 10. You would never know the difference. The bits are always going to work with young people in mind, and so I would much rather lean on my young review of this than my current review of this. That being said, my current review of this is not a very good movie. I have seen a lot of Pink Panther films. We actually talked about one of the later Pink Panther sequels, not of the Steve Martin films, on the Film Rescue Show. And for that, I had gone back and watched the original Pink Panther, the second one, and a couple of the other sequels. There are a lot of Pink Panther movies. And I distinctly remember the style of the first Steve Martin Pink Panther remake really pushing people away from that 1970s James Bond, the Connery era Bond specifically, and pushed it more into that like flashy early 2000s look and feel. Jason Statham is in that movie. Beyonce's in that movie. Beyonce, which I find extra hilarious after she was also in one of the Austin Powers movies. Does she just enjoy like spy comedies? Is that like her thing? There's a romance plot that runs under the surface of this movie, which is really, really silly because the characters that are in love end up only having, I think, 3 conversations with each other across the movie, and one of them happens in a flashback. The flashback does set up the flaming flan bit from later on in the movie, so there is like setup and payoff to some of these jokes that it's more obvious when you're watching it through fresh eyes, but have also seen the movie before. Everyone involved here, Alfred Molina and Andy Garcia specifically, are punching so far above their weight class. You can tell this is kind of a vacation movie for them. They get to go all around the world. They get to play goofy characters with goofy accents. I really ended up enjoying the scene between Alfred Molina and Steve Martin where they're like out detectiving each other, because it does show that Clouseau is a good detective. He does have one of the greatest detective minds. He's just clumsy as fuck. Also very socially unaware, and I do like that the movie wanted to dive into that a little bit too, with him having like societal lessons that he absolutely can't graduate from because he's a misogynist Frenchman. That's the aspect of the movies that do really still work to this day. This is a movie that is not just here to parody detective films, but it's here to parody Pink Panther films. Where I think the movie gets lost is trying to be so much for kids. I think maybe they didn't anticipate that the first movie was going to be such a critical darling for families and families with young kids. That was us. That was the Decker family was watching this because it was slapstick in the vein of Home Alone and things like that that we had grown up on and loved. Because they lean into that, there's also aspects of the movie that just end up feeling really forced and kind of silly. I had totally forgotten all of the karate propaganda from the late 90s into the mid-aughts. Every single kid that wasn't in sports was getting pushed into karate, and this was one of those movies that wanted to like hang its hat on that. Jeremy Irons is also here playing not exactly the villain, but someone working with the villain. I don't know to what effect. None of his scenes are funny. It's actually really crazy to me that he doesn't get to crack a single joke and instead has to play straight to Steve Martin, but there's no camaraderie between the two of them. It's things like that that really hurt this movie overall. This one was despised on Rotten Tomatoes, carrying a 13% to this day. Whew, boy, that's rough. That is a rough score to see. I don't know if it's necessarily that bad, but I don't know if I'd put it in the over 50% category. This one also wasn't as much of a commercial success, where it barely made its own budget back in its theatrical run, and it would have been its DVD release later where it made any kind of money on top of that. Not that Steve Martin or any of the rest of the cast is really hurting for it. These are all top of the line, Oscar award winning kind of actors. Part of this series has been revisiting movies that I've not seen in a long time, because while some of my favorite movies end up being in the Ticket Stub Movie Club, some of the movies that I've totally forgotten I've ever seen end up being here too. I couldn't remember the plot of this movie if you had held a gun to my head until I rewatched it last night, and then everything slowly started coming back to me. But I was honestly remembering more bits from the first one than I remembered from the second one. To me, the question then becomes, would I recommend revisiting this movie if you haven't seen it in a while? Your mileage is going to vary, buddy. I don't know what to tell you. Like I said at the top, if this was one of your favorite movies growing up, you are going to have some nostalgia as you remember back through it. But when you watch it through an adult lens, you're going to be shocked at how disjointed and discombobulated the movie can feel. That being said, this is a series that I think should keep running. I would take another Pink Panther movie. There's another way to swing at this. There are comedians out there working right now that I think could do really fun stuff. And the way the genre of detective and spy thrillers has shifted, you could parody that stuff much in the way the old ones work. I would also love to see a reintroduction of the old 70s shooting style, shooting on big, wide 70mm film, huge, beautiful sets, instead of these like really closed, locked in kind of things that you end up getting in these like 90s, early aught style movies. If you compare something like Pink Panther 4 to a James Bond movie, they have very, very similar looks. And next we go from detective comedy into detective thriller with The International. I bet you forgot about this one. I will see you tomorrow.